GLC presents, brought to you by the donations of our faithful partners.
Shalom. I'm Eddie Chumney of Hebraic Heritage Ministries, and we welcome you today to our study on the Hebraic roots of Christianity. We are doing a study entitled Yeshua from Genesis to Revelation. And this is session 20 in our study. And today we're going to be looking at the patterns of exile and redemption. We are looking at how the 12 tribes are going to be gathered in the end of days. And it is the Messiah who is going to gather the exiles of Israel. In Psalm, in chapter 102, in verse 13, it is written, "And you will arise and have mercy on Zion, for the time to favor her, yea, the set time is come." And then it says in verse 16, "When the Lord builds up Zion," when He builds up Zion, He will appear in His glory. What is the building up of Zion? The building up of Zion is the same as the building up of Jerusalem, because Zion and Jerusalem in the Bible are synonymous terms. And it says in Psalm 147 verse 2, "The Lord builds up Jerusalem, He gathers together the outcasts of Israel." So when the Lord builds up Zion, or He builds up Jerusalem, which means when He gathers the 12 tribes of Israel, He will appear in His glory. When is Yeshua going to appear in His glory? When He sets His feet down on the Mount of Olives at His second coming. So He builds up Zion and appears in His glory. So prior to Yeshua setting His feet down on the Mount of Olives, He is going to gather the 12 tribes of Israel. In this gathering is during a period of time known as Jacob's trouble. Jeremiah in chapter 30 and verse 3 says, "For lo, the days come, says the Lord, that I will bring again the captivity of my people, Israel and Judah." The subject is Israel, that is the 10 tribes, and Judah, that is the house of Judah, or the southern kingdom, or the Jewish people. And He's going to cause them to return to the land that I gave to their fathers, and they will possess it. In speaking about Israel and Judah returning to the land, it says in Jeremiah chapter 30 verse 7, "Alas, for that day is great, it's none like it. It is even the time of Jacob's trouble." So how is this going to happen? In our last program, we looked at that it's going to come about when the nations divide the land of Israel and the city of Jerusalem, kick Jews out of their homes. It will result in the judgment of the nations, and in judging the nations in the fall of Babylon, we will have the gathering of the 12 tribes of Israel and Yeshua, the Messiah, appearing in His glory. But we want to begin to look at additional details regarding understanding how the 12 tribes are actually going to be gathered back to the land of Israel by the Messiah. And in order to understand how this is going to happen, you need to understand the principles and patterns of exile and redemption. We are told in Micah in chapter 7 and verse 15, "According to the days of your coming out of the land of Egypt," according to those days of you coming out of Egypt, "will I show unto you marvelous things." According to those days will I show unto you marvelous things. And then we have a similar passage in Hosea in chapter 2 and verse 15. "I will give her her vineyards from there, in the valley of Achor for a door of hope." The word Achor in Hebrew means trouble or troubling. So we're told that the valley of trouble is a door of hope. Well, the valley of trouble is an allusion to the tribulation period. And here we're told that the tribulation period is a door or a time of hope. This is not something that we were taught in traditional Christianity. But why and how is it a time or a door of hope? It goes on to say, because she will sing there, as in the days of her youth, as in the days when she came up out of the land of Egypt. She will sing as she did sing when she came out of Egypt. Now, Paul understood this, and he wrote about it, and he instructed believers in Yeshua as the Messiah in 1 Corinthians in chapter 10 and verses 1 and 2, and then verse 11. Speaking to believers in Yeshua the Messiah, he says, "Moreover, brethren, I would not that you be ignorant how all our fathers were under the cloud, and that they all passed through the sea. And they were all immersed into Moses in the cloud and in the sea." This is speaking about the historical Egyptian Exodus. And writing to believers in Yeshua as the Messiah, he's telling them not to be ignorant of the historical Egyptian Exodus, that all our fathers came out of Egypt. Well, do you realize that that is not literally true? My father and grandfather didn't literally come out of Egypt, and your father and grandfather didn't literally come out of Egypt, and Paul's father and grandfather didn't literally come out of Egypt. But he's writing to believers in Yeshua as the Messiah and telling them not to be ignorant that all our fathers did come out of Egypt. Well, one of the commandments of the Torah is you are to see yourself as the event of the coming out of Egypt, that it happened to you if you are a believer in the God of Israel and are in covenant relationship with Him. And it says in Exodus chapter 13 verse 8, "You will show your son in that day, saying, this is done because of that which the Lord did for me when I came out of Egypt." But the son in that day didn't literally come out of Egypt. But in celebrating Passover, you're supposed to tell your son that he came out of Egypt. That each generation is to identify with the coming out of Egypt. And then we have Deuteronomy in chapter 16 and verse 3. The end of the verse says, "That you may remember the day when you came forth out of the land of Egypt all the days of your life." That you might remember the day when you came out of Egypt all the days of your life. Not only individually all the days of your life, but you are to remember it in each generation. Why? Why is it so important to remember the coming out of Egypt? Because Paul goes on to explain in 1 Corinthians in chapter 10 verse 11, "Now all those things happened unto them for examples, for a type and a shadow." What happened to the children of Israel in coming out of Egypt and how they came out of Egypt was written as examples for us. Because it says they were written for our admonition, our encouragement, our instruction, upon whom the ends of the world are come. That what happened to them was written to believers in Yeshua as the Messiah. And what happened to them was written as encouragement, as instruction for those who are living in the end of days. Because Paul knew that Messianic times was associated with the uniting of the 12 tribes of Israel. And Paul himself told us in Acts chapter 22 and verse 3 that he learned the Torah sitting at the feet of Gamaliel. So he would have been taught these principles, that each generation is to see themselves as if they came out of Egypt, and that the future gathering of the 12 tribes of Israel from the nations where they've been scattered is likened unto how the children of Israel came out of Egypt. And so this is what Paul is communicating to believers in Yeshua as the Messiah in 1 Corinthians in chapter 10 and verses 1 through 4. And he goes on to explain in 2 Thessalonians in chapter 2 verses 1 and 2 that the uniting of the 12 tribes of Israel takes place in the day of the Lord, or the day of Christ, or the day of Messiah. 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 verses 1 and 2. Now we beseech you, brethren, by the coming of our Lord Yeshua HaMashiach and our gathering together unto him. And he goes on to say in verse 2 that the day of Messiah is at hand. So the gathering together, that is the building up of Jerusalem, which is the gathering of the outcasts of Israel, or the 12 tribes of Israel, that not only when that happens will the Messiah appear in his glory, but we're told that that happens in a period of time known as the day of Messiah. And the way it happens is patterned after how it did happen in Egypt. So this is a major principle in understanding the way in which the 12 tribes are going to be gathered in the end of days. We also have the biblical principle that the God of Israel has already told the future, or the end of days, in the beginning. Well, what are we explaining here? We're explaining that the way that the 12 tribes are going to be united in the end of days is patterned after how it was in the beginning, in the book of Exodus, in the Torah. Another major principle is the events that happened to the forefathers are prophecies or foreshadows of what will happen to their descendants. Another way of phrasing it is biblical history is prophecy. So we need to understand that the end of days is told in the beginning. We need to understand that biblical history is prophecy, and we need to understand that the future gathering of the 12 tribes of Israel is patterned after the historical one. These things are significant in allowing us to understand how the 12 tribes are going to be gathered in the end of days. So let's look at some scriptures for these principles, and let's begin to apply the principles. The first thing we're going to see is that the end is told in the beginning. In Isaiah, in chapter 46, and verses 9 through 11, it is written, "Remember the former things of old. I am God, and there is none else. I am God, and there is none like me." Why is there none like the God of Israel? Well, the reason is, verse 10, because he declares the end, that is the future, from the beginning. No one is able to tell you the end in the beginning, or pattern the beginning so it foreshadows the end. And from ancient times, the things that are not yet done. He told you in ancient times the things that haven't happened yet, saying, "My counsel will stand, and I will do all my pleasure." How did he from ancient times tell you the things that are not yet done? Through the individual lives of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Through telling us how the children of Israel came out of Egypt. Those things that literally happened are patterns and examples of and prophecies of what will happen in the future. Isaiah 46 verse 11, "I have spoken it, when? In the beginning. I will bring it to pass, when? In the end. I've purposed it," or prophesied of it, when? In the beginning. I will also do it. We can see this principle as well in Ecclesiastes in chapter 1 in verse 9, which is going to communicate to us, as well as Ecclesiastes chapter 3 verse 15, the principle that biblical history is prophecy. Ecclesiastes chapter 1, verse 9. The thing that has been, that is history, is that which shall be, that is future or prophecy. And that which is done, that which is happening today in the world, is that which shall be done, because there is no new thing under the sun. Ecclesiastes 3, verse 15. That which has been, that which has happened in the past, is what is happening now. And that which is to be, that which is going to happen in the future, has already happened before in type and shadow, because God requires that which is past. So let's begin to see how biblical history is prophecy, how in the pattern of the children of Israel coming out of Egypt foreshadows the end of days, the events of the end of days, and the oppression that the world will bring upon the 12 tribes who are going to be returning to the land of Israel during the tribulation period. Well, the setting of the historical Egyptian Exodus had this condition. In Exodus in chapter 1 and verse 6, it says that Joseph died and all of his brethren and all that generation. And then in Exodus chapter 1 verse 8, there arose a new king over Egypt who knew not Joseph. That is always the condition for the redemption. There is going to be a king that arises that doesn't know Joseph. What does this mean? Well, one application of doesn't know Joseph is that Judeo-Christian values and principles will be forgotten. When those principles are forgotten and ignored, which is represented by Joseph, when a new king arises over Egypt that doesn't know Joseph, that is the environment which redemption will come about. Another way of looking at there arose a new king over Egypt that knew not Joseph. This is speaking about that the ruler wherein the Jewish people are living will not have regard for the Jewish people, not have regard for the God of Israel, not have regard for the Torah, not have regard for the covenant that was made with Abraham, and will create the conditions for anti-Semitism to exist. Well, in Exodus in chapter 1, verses 15 and 16 and verse 22, Pharaoh decreed the death of every Hebrew son. And what we're going to begin to do is we're going to begin to look at examples and conditions of the children of Israel in coming out of Egypt and how that foreshadows the end of days and similar conditions. So we look at Pharaoh decreed the death of every Hebrew son, Exodus chapter 1, verses 15 and 16. And the king of Egypt spoke to the Hebrew midwives, of which the name of one was Shiphrah, and the name of the other Puah. And he said, when you do the office of a midwife to the Hebrew women and see them upon the stools, if it be a son, then you shall kill him. But if it be a daughter, then she shall live. Verse 22 says, and Pharaoh charged all the people, saying, every son that is born you shall cast in the river, and every daughter you shall save alive. So there arose a Pharaoh who knew not Joseph, and this Pharaoh didn't have regard for Hebrew children who were being born in the land. This is a foreshadowing of a prophecy of violence that Babylon will show toward Zion in the end of days, which is prophesied in Jeremiah chapter 51, verse 24 and verse 35, which says the following. And I will render unto Babylon and all the inhabitants of Chaldea all the evil that they have done in Zion in your sight. This is a prophecy that the conditions are going to be created so violence will be done to Zion. Who and what is Zion? Zion, biblical Zion, is those who are standing for the covenant that was made with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And when you stand for the covenant that was made with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, you will realize that when the nations divide the land of Israel in the city of Jerusalem, it is a violation of the covenant that was made with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And if the nations decide that the creation of a PLO state is going to be based upon 67 borders, then additional Jews were going to have to be removed from their homes. And because we have somewhere between 250,000 and 300,000 Jews who are living in Judea and Samaria, that in order to remove them from their homes, it will entail a fight. Jeremiah chapter 51 and verse 35, it says, "The violence done to me and my flesh be upon Babylon, shall the inhabitant of Zion say, in my blood upon the inhabitants of Chaldea shall Jerusalem say." So the point is that there was a Pharaoh that arose that didn't know Joseph, and he showed violence to the Hebrew children who were to be born. He did not want them to be born. So in the end of days, Babylon is going to be violent toward Zion. In Revelation in chapter 12 and verse 1, we are told that there appeared a great wonder in heaven. And this wonder is a woman clothed with the sun and the moon under her feet, and upon her head a crown of 12 stars. This woman who has upon her head a crown of 12 stars, a woman with 12 stars. Who do the 12 stars represent? It represents the 12 tribes of Israel. So this is a sign of the uniting of the 12 tribes of Israel. And when this is happening, it says in Revelation chapter 12 verse 3 that there appeared another wonder in heaven. Behold, a great red dragon having 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 crowns. Well, this entity of 7 heads, 10 horns, and 7 crowns goes on in Revelation chapter 13 and is described as the beast and the beast system. That this beast and beast system will be opposing the woman who has upon her head a crown of 12 stars. That this beast system will be opposing the uniting of the 12 tribes of Israel. And then it goes on to say in Revelation chapter 12 verse 6 that the woman fled into the wilderness. And then in verse 17, the dragon was wroth with the woman and went to make war with the remnant of her seed, which keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Yeshua HaMashiach. So those who are fleeing in the wilderness, they are keeping the commandments of God. They are following the Torah. They believe in following the Torah. And they believe that Yeshua is the Messiah. These are believers in Yeshua as the Messiah who are returning to the land of Israel during Jacob's trouble as a part of the ingathering of the 12 tribes of Israel. They believe in following the Torah, and they understand the prophecies of the uniting of the 12 tribes of Israel and how it relates and pertains not only to natural house of Jacob, who's personified by the Jewish people, but the prophecies relate and pertain to those who were redeemed in Yeshua the Messiah, the redeemed house of Jacob. As we're told that Yeshua rules and reigns over the house of Jacob forever, and of his kingdom there will be no end, in Luke in chapter 1 and verse 33. So this is the beginning of our study today on looking at the principles and patterns of exile and redemption, which will give us an understanding of the details of the circumstances that will be happening when, during Jacob's trouble or the tribulation, that the 12 tribes of Israel will be gathered back to the land of Israel. And this uniting of the 12 tribes back to the land of Israel is the building up of Zion, or the building up of Jerusalem. And once again, we are told in Psalm 102 and verse 16 that when the Lord builds up Zion, he will appear in his glory. Well, remember always these words from 1 John in chapter 2 and verse 6. He who says he abides in him, he who says he's a believer in Yeshua as the Messiah, ought himself to walk. That means to live our lives even as he walked. How did Yeshua walk or live his life? He followed the Torah, and he instructed his believers that if you love him, that you keep his commandments. What is keeping his commandments? Since he is the lawgiver, James chapter 4 verse 12, it is following his Torah. Shalom in Yeshua the Messiah. Amen.